Chapter 43, Chapter 40, The Trials of the Past. Chapter 40, The Trials of the Past. Power. We still need more of your power. God still needs more of your power. Give your soul to God. Pray to God. Praise God. Give your heart and mind to God. You are becoming God's power. Ryu woke up. For a moment, he almost grabbed for his sword as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings, until he remembered the events of the previous day and relaxed. Climbing out of bed, he dressed himself before leaving the bedroom and descending the stairs of the pleasant, yet still strange, house they had been given in Dologani. Spar and Sten were both already up. The former was starting on making their breakfast from the food that had been left for them, while the latter lounged against a wall in the kitchen, idly sharpening one of his knives. Both glanced at Ryu when he joined them, but neither spoke, and he didn't try starting a conversation either. Something about the Dragon Town, despite its unique sort of beauty, made aimless chatter seem unnecessary, especially with the knowledge of what they would face today hanging above them. Soon, the others joined them, some helping Spar with the cooking while others simply took their places and watched. Dees, as always, was last to awaken, but more than any of them she seemed pensive and thoughtful rather than her usual drowsy self at early hours. They ate their meal in silence as well, and after taking care of the dishes, left the house to find the man who called himself Specchio waiting for them outside. "Follow me," he said, curt and simple, before turning and starting towards the temple they had talked outside of the previous day. Ryu did so, and the others followed, until they reached the temple doors. There were no means of opening them immediately available, but the old man was undeterred. Stepping forward, he placed his hand flat against the double doors, and they swung open inward, as if moving on some sort of mechanism. The hall inside was a place of history, that much was evident at first glance. Marble statues lined both sides, trailing off into the darkness ahead of them, as the light from outside faded away. Stepping inside, Specchio created a sphere of light in his hand, and the illumination grew, allowing them to see further down the hall as well as higher on the walls. Huge murals were set there, above the statues, showing scenes from the history of the Dragon Clan, and the times when they had been called upon to save the world. Ryu, however, was more interested in the statues. The closest to the door, on the left, was of a handsome young man dressed in rough clothing, casually carrying a sword in one hand. The other was raised to shade his eyes as he looked off into some long-forgotten sunset, smiling cheerfully. Opposite him was a young girl with short hair and small wings, wearing a cloaked dress over leggings. She carried an odd, short staff or wand held almost negligently behind her back, and her gaze across the hall was hesitant, but optimistic. "The first two," Dee said quietly. "The first Ryu, and the first Nina." "He looks like me," Ryu murmured. "She doesn't like Nina, but him." "You look more like him than any of the rest of us have," Specchio agreed. "These were the guys who were with them, then?" Bao guessed, glancing further down the hall. The next two were both men. One was a massive Warren clansman, much more bulky than either Tiga or Cat, who wore odd, tribal-looking clothes and carried a giant club. The other was of the Forest clan, lean and wolfish with shaggy fur, dressed in a robe-like garment with a sword carried in the same way as the first Ryus. Beyond them were a bizarre, round suit of armor and a woman who looked like a hybrid, mostly human in appearance save for her long ears and fox-like tail. Her clothes were baggy and decorative, and she carried some sort of lost technology as her apparent weapon. "Cray," Nina read aloud, looking at the base of each in turn. The first looked surly, the second philosophical, the third eager and the fourth defiant. "Sayaz. Ershin. Ursula. Where are you?" Sten asked Dees, scratching his chin. "Weren't you one of them?" "That was me," she explained, indicating the armor named Ershin. "Sort of. It's a long story." "This is you, then," Ryu said to Specchio, continuing down to the next statue. The man standing there was a long-haired savage clad in furs, holding what looked like reins in one hand and a long sword in the other. Despite his obvious primitiveness, there was something strangely appealing in his cheerful, challenging grin. The woman opposite him was just the opposite. Her dress was slim and slid up the leg to allow her freedom of movement, but she was still clearly nobility, even ignoring the tiara she wore. Despite that, the saber she carried and the smirk on her face betrayed her true nature. "Yeah, me and the rest of them," Specchio grunted, as they glanced at the next statues. A tough, reliable-looking forest clansman who carried a hand axe and a long spear, one in each hand. A young, cheerful human who was stringing about with unconscious ease. A gigantic builder clansman, even larger than most of their kind, with a helmet made from what looked like a dragon's skull over his head and a heavy cudgel in his hand. A tiny, furry man, who Ryu guessed to be half mole clan and half forest clan, with cold eyes belying his cute appearance and a knife in hand.
There you are,
Rand grunted as they reached a statue of Deez in her current appearance. About the only difference was that the statue looked much more intimidating, the smile on her features that of a woman who could and would kill out of pure irritation.
Looks like you've relaxed a little, since then. I tend to pick up whatever the prevailing attitude of the time is, a little,
she admitted.
And that was a bad one. They get me a little better the next time.
It was true. Further down, past 7 more, was another of her, this time looking much more cheerful and relaxed. 5 of those 7 were familiar to them all, though much younger, as was the statue of Ox, similar to the one they had seen in Gant. The last was a youth of the Mole clan, his features sheepish and sleepy. Beyond the second or third statue of Deez, the hall was empty of both statues and murals.
So, wait,
Ryu said slowly.
Say we pull this off, kill a god, save the world, yada yada yada. Does that mean we go up in here, next? That going to be a problem?
Specchio asked, raising an eyebrow.
Heh.
Bao chuckled.
Nah, it's just a bit embarrassing. Sounds exciting, to me.
Cat grinned.
So long as mine looks cute, anyways. Statues of us.
Rand muttered.
Good grief. I do have to wonder what they'll look like, though,
Nina told him, giggling lightly.
Exactly.
Sten laughed as well.
I love that kind of stuff. Indeed.
Jean agreed.
Beautiful statues will undoubtedly be created by the combination of this clan's talented sculptors and our features. I see.
Spar slowly nodded.
So that is what statues are for. I always wondered. Fascinating. Just remember, mine had better be beautiful, or else I'll kill you.
Deez told Specchio cheerfully.
Oh yeah, and there's going to be one more. I'll explain that while they're in there. Oh, boy.
Specchio sighed, stopping before a pair of doors, then turning to face them. When he spoke again, his voice was much more stiff and formal, almost like a recitation.
Before you enter, know what you are about to do. The Dragon Clan was given the breath of fire to fight for the existence of this world, against those who would threaten it. Each Dragon Clansman has the potential to unlock that gift, but only the chosen ones, one every 1,000 years, can take it to the 4th and final level. Agni Anphani, a transformation that can alter the laws of reality itself, and slay even gods. Its shape is determined by the man who learns and uses it, much like the 3rd stage. Agni Anphani, however, comes at a price. It can only be learned by one who has known the depths of despair, and endured without losing his capacity for hope. In order to gain, you must first give. A sacrifice will be required, of something vitally important. Above all, you must conquer that which is your greatest weakness, and emerge stronger than when you entered this room. Do you understand this, and accept? We do,
all 9 of them, even Deez, said together.
Then enter, one by one,
Specchio told them.
The order does not matter. Simply close the door behind you, so that the next one may proceed without wait. Good luck, and may Laden be with you.
Spar was the second to last one to step through the door. Nodding at Deez, it opened it and walked through, carefully closing it behind it. As it did, it felt the breath of nature's contact with the food plants grown in Drogen and subterranean specimens both above and below vanish abruptly, as if it had truly stepped through a door into another world. At the same time, its ability to sense magic was cut off, just as sharply, as was the sense of Shin's mind within its own.
Interesting,
the grass man murmured, surveying the room if it could be called that it had entered. A strange, rolling white fog covered everything, and the wall behind it stretched off into endless distance in all directions but down. The only thing that was visible through the mists was what looked to be a dead tree, or at least that was what it looked like from the door. Without a word, Spar began walking towards it.
Ah, there you are,
a warm voice with an unfamiliar accent hailed him as he approached, and somebody else began walking forward. He had been leaning against the dead tree, hidden by the fog.
Gus Ispara, Spar by preference, yes. And you would most likely be the one who will be overseeing this trial, of mine,
Spar replied easily, stopping and allowing the man to close the distance between them.
Might I know your name in return? Well, of course, old boy,
the man agreed in the same laid-back, strange accent.
That's only polite, after all.
More odd than his voice was the fact that despite appearing to be human, his skin was a dark blue in color, head and hands. He was clad in expensive-looking green robes, the chest of which bore the emblem of a six-headed dragon, each had a different color. Bald as an egg, he looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, despite his friendly voice, his eyes were cold and cunning, one of them tinted by a ruby monocle.
My name is Court,
he told Spar as he shook out his wide sleeves in a gesture that, despite no violent significance whatsoever, reminded the grass man of the way cat would crack her knuckles or Sten would palm a knife.
In life, I was known as the Blue Alchemist of the Dark Dragon Empire's Tiamat unit. As you guessed, I'll be overseeing your lesson today.
I see, Spar murmured, as its mind raced back 1,000 years, when it had only been a bulb. Even then, and even in that state, it had heard of the Tiamat unit. Everybody had heard of the Tiamat unit, of each specific member, and of what they were capable. And even after 1,000 years, it remembered what it had heard. It waited a moment more, before speaking again, reluctantly allowing emotion to enter its voice.
Oh, fornication,
Spar moaned as, from the mists above, a shower of some strange green liquid doused it from head to toe.
That is a very special formula that I created at the behest of Emperor Zog,
Court explained, ignoring what Spar had said.
Fortunately, it ended up being prohibitively difficult to produce in bulk given the technology at the time, or I dare say I would have a great many more atrocities to answer for than I already do. The active ingredient is phosphorus, which I do believe will even affect a floral life form such as yourself. I see,
Spar replied, crossing its arms. Despite the implications, it remained perfectly calm.
And what must I do to counteract the effect, before it begins? I assume there is a way. This is a trial, after all, rather than an execution. Another logical conclusion.
Court's smile widened as he began producing several vials from his sleeves, each a different color, and setting them down on the ground before him in a line.
One of these bottles contains the antidote. An oral administration within the next 3 minutes should do it. The rest, I'm afraid, all contain various other deadly poisons, which are all much more fast-acting, in many unpleasant ways. I can imagine so, from what I recall of your career,
Spar agreed, looking the line of bottles over as he finished. There were 8 of them in total, and it had 2 minutes and 40 seconds.
Allow me to make another educated assumption, then. Will you now be providing me with several statements about the selections at hand, phrased in a way meant to confuse and misdirect me? Something like that,
Court said, stepping back, and though his tone remained the same, his voice somehow seemed much more cold and sharp than before.
1. The antidote is in an even-numbered bottle. 2. Each bottle has been assigned a number. 3. The bottles are numbered in reverse order from right to left. 4. The antidote is a color that lies between red and blue on the visible spectrum. 5. The antidote is either a primary or a secondary color, or else it is indigo or pink. Which is to say, it is one of the 8 colors represented here,
Spar murmured dryly, looking over the bottles. From the hints given, it had narrowed the possibilities down to 3, but it only had 1 minute and 52 seconds now.
6,
Court continued, as if he hadn't heard.
The antidote is not of the same color as the original toxin. 7. The antidote is in a bottle shaped polyhedrally. 8. The antidote is in a bottle on the right of at least 2 other bottles. 9. The antidote is in a bottle on the left of at least 2 other bottles.
Stepping forward, he began rearranging the bottles, shuffling them around, as he continued.
10. The antidote is in a bottle which is stoppered by cork, rather than rubber. I hope you're not counting on me to forget which order they were originally.
Spar started to say, then paused as it processed the last statement, noting at the same time that it had 1 minute and 5 seconds left.
Wait. That is a logical fallacy. It is incongruous with previous statements. 11,
Court replied, glancing up. There was nothing even slightly friendly in his smile now, and his eyes glittered with a remote sort of fascination, that of a man interested in the results of his current actions and nothing more.
The antidote stopper is held in place by silk thread. 12. The antidote is in a bottle made of glass. 13. I am a known liar, whose word should not be relied upon without additional corroboration under any circumstances whatsoever. 14. There is no antidote. All of these bottles will kill you. 15. All of the bottles contain an antidote. None of them will kill you. I see,
Spar murmured, mind racing. In only an instant, it concluded that the statements were a false lead, and always had been. It was meant to find the antidote through some means other than Court's words. What that means was, however, it had no idea, and only 49 seconds remained.
16,
Court said, as he began picking the bottles up again and proceeded to start juggling them.
My true name is Abigail, and I am a 47-year-old female thug in the employ of a local crime syndicate. 17. You have exactly 40 seconds remaining. 18. I am the illegitimate son of Emperor Zog. 19. Of my previous statements, only those which were even-numbered have been true, and all of those which are odd-numbered are lies. 20. The exact opposite of the previous statement is in fact true, while that statement was false. You almost had me, with those last two,
Spar told him, as it continued to speculate. For a moment, it considered persuasive violence, before shuddering at the thought of the probable result and discarding that particular notion entirely. In seconds, pure fact was exhausted, and it moved on by necessity to theory, in which it quickly focused on the nature of the trial itself. Said trial was supposedly meant to assist in each of their individual, spiritual progressions, which likely meant overcoming their own flaws. The most glaring of those, in its case, was obvious. Snatching a random bottle out of the air, Spar drank it without even looking at it.
Correct.
Cord began making the others vanish back into his sleeves, one at a time, as he continued to juggle. In an instant, his cruel smirk relaxed back into the warm grin he had presented before, and this time it reached his eyes.
How did you know? I didn't,
Spar replied honestly.
I took a wild guess. Operated on a random feeling. In short, I operated on emotion, rather than logic. That bottle felt right. Correct.
Cord adjusted his ruby monocle, still smiling.
Logic is the foundation of all knowledge, old boy, but like everything else in existence, it is limited. At times, one must go with one's heart, rather than their mind. You've been slowly cultivating your own emotional capacity over the last few months.
Turning away, he waved cheerfully as he walked away into the fog.
I advise that you test your own limits sometime. I dare say even you might be surprised by just how far you've come.
When the fog vanished, a moment later, Spar stood alone, in an empty stone room.
Weird,
Kat muttered, staring at the fog surrounding her.
Could have sworn the building was way too small for anything like this. Is that a dead tree?
Shifting her battle staff idly in one hand, she walked over to it.
Yeah, it is. Hey.
After a moment, she began looking around.
So, where's this trial thing? Anybody else here? Hello? God damn it, this had better not involve thinking. I hate when I have to do that, and I suck at it anyways. Look, if anybody's here, come out already, hey.
And then her instincts screamed, and she dived to the side, avoiding an attack from above.
Well, at least you're sharp, even if you're far too loud,
the woman who had dived at her said as she landed on all fours and immediately lunged for Kat again, a knife in each hand. She was fast, and Kat was barely able to get her battle staff up in time to knock one of her hands away, the other, she was forced to awkwardly sidestep in a way that still left her open to it a moment later. Moving almost automatically, she brought her free hand around to intercept the woman's when she slashed to the side. Instead of catching her wrist and breaking it, however, her fingers only scraped it as she turned the motion into a sideways tumble. Somersaulting away, she ended it with a leap that took her back towards the tree, and she landed on its thickest branch as easily as any bird.
You've got some pretty good moves,
Kat told her, eyes narrowing as she looked her over. Tan-skinned with long, golden blonde hair, she was gorgeous, though her violet eyes were hard and cold. She wore a breastplate, one with a six-headed dragon painted on the front, but no other armor save for steel bracers on her forearms. Her skirt was slit up the side, her boots practical, and a long white cloak covered her back.
Pretty cheap, though, jumping me like that. Where's the fun in doing it that way, hey? I'm afraid fun is hardly a priority of mine, catch on,
the woman replied, smiling slightly, her knife still firmly in hand.
I tend to focus more on professionalism, as an assassin. Specifically, the White Assassin of the Dark Dragon Empire's Tiamat unit. My name is Cyril, and it seems I'll be teaching you a lesson today. Yeah, right,
Kat started to scoff, before pausing.
Wait. Cyril? I've heard that name before.
She trailed off as the first part of what she had said connected.
Oh, yeah. The Dark Dragon. Empires. Tiamat. Unit.
She waited a moment more, before dropping a curse directed toward herself.
Sorry,
Cyril said, tilting her head slightly before suddenly diving forward as fast and smooth as if she had plumed downward instead.
I'm taken. And besides, I prefer men.
Kat's comeback died on her lips as she realized she'd be too late to block either knife this time. Instead, she flipped herself backwards, bringing her feet up in a double kick. To her astonishment, Searle brought her own boots forward and landed on hers, foot to foot for a split second before she jumped up, front flipped and dived towards Kat again while she was still working on her own landing. With no time to think, Kat brought her battle staff up, hoping to nail Searle upside the chin with it before she could reach her with the knives. In response, Searle lashed out with one blade and knocked it aside, and Kat was forced to slide forward and under her in order to avoid being gutted. Even as she did, however, she knew what would happen next, and kept her grip on the battle staff. Her instincts had been right again. The blind lash she struck out with immediately came just in time to keep Searle from whirling and sinking her knives into Kat's back.
Shit,
she cursed again as Searle blocked the staff with her knife, and used the force to help her leap away, as she came to two simultaneous realizations. First was that she knew now that she had Searle beat on speed. Second was that Searle was faster than she was, and more agile as well.
I wouldn't recommend trying your new magic, by the way,
Searle told her, voice casual, as she remained crouching just out of battle staff range.
I'll be able to dodge it, and you'll be wide open, which will be all I'll need. Gee, thanks,
Kat snarked, unable to keep herself from smiling. Despite her worry, even if the other woman had the advantage, it was still close enough that the fight was fun, in a way most of hers hadn't been lately.
Let me guess. Next, you're going to tell me you were going easy on me up until now, right? Actually.
Searle smiled as well, as she made a strange stomping motion with the toe of each boot, prompting two more knife blades to pop out from them.
Yes. Oh, come on.
Kat yelled as Searle dashed forward along the ground, knives held at her side. They clashed again, battle staff meeting first one knife then the other, before Kat dived out of the way of the remaining two. Even as she did, Searle continued dashing after her, and it was all that she could do to keep avoiding being gutted. Taking control of the fight and attacking was completely out of the question. Searle had her on the run. Kat realized that, and understood the implications. That Searle was just plain better than her, and that was all there was to it. Even Chop Chop would have just made her laugh. And the worst part was, if it had been any of the others, she knew they would have been able to come up with something. They all had something up their sleeves other than just plain brawling, in case something like this ever happened. Even Jean was more than a one-trick pony. But not her.
What the hell am I supposed to, God?
Kat muttered, before grunting in pain, as a knife finally got through, slicing lightly across her lower ribs as she dived away.
Concentrate,
Searle told her, voice calm and cold.
You're thinking too much, instead of acting, and it's making you sloppy. Screw you.
Kat roared, even as Searle came at her again. This time, though, something seemed different. It took her a moment to catch on, but once she noticed it, there was no doubt in her mind that it was there. Searle's strikes had a strange sort of rhythm to them, a pattern, a fluidity of motion that was present every time. She had needed those first few exchanges to start sensing it, but now that she knew it was there, she felt like she knew where and when the knives would come, almost before they did. It was something that she had never been able to put into words, because she didn't know any to describe it. All of Kat's senses were above average, but when it came to a fight, the one she relied on most of all wasn't sight or hearing, but feel. The way knife clashed against battle staff, the complex movements their bodies made around and against each other, was something that she couldn't stop sensing even if she had wanted to. It was part of her, as much as her own hands, and now that it was working, the other woman's advantage of speed no longer seemed quite as overwhelming. They fought for several more minutes, Searle remaining on the offensive and Kat on the defensive, but the white assassin was no longer able to get through. After a few exchanges, Kat deliberately left an opening, and when Searle refused to fall for it, she knew that she could win. The next time, she met Searle's offense with a charge of her own, and one by one swept the knives away before falling back on what she had learned in her years of street fighting, and abruptly kicking her opponent right between the legs. Searle didn't immediately bend over, like a male would have, but she still paused and grunted in pain, and that was all Kat needed to follow up with a full spinal headbutt.
You would not believe how many people think that only works on guys,
she said as Searle fell backwards, and she leveled the triple blades at the end of her battle staff at her enemy's throat, despite how her head was swimming.
Maybe it doesn't hurt as much, but it'll still work. Good fight, though. It was,
Searle agreed, meeting her eyes, all the cold pragmatism gone from hers now and replaced by a relaxed look of approval.
Don't sell yourself short like that from now on. Even if you probably didn't even know you were doing it until now. Like what?
Kat said, frowning, before remembering the thought that had flickered through her head.
Oh, yeah. Wait a second here, I thought it was another one of you who could read minds. I can't read minds,
Searle assured her.
But I can read people. You and me are alike in some ways. One of those is that we're more simple than the others on our respective teams. They're all good at many different things, but you and me, fighting and killing is all we know how to do. It's all we ever have.
She got back to her feet as Kat pulled the battle staff away.
But that doesn't mean you're not just as valuable. Or that what you do can't be turned to other things, if you try. Tell me, have you ever tried dancing? Not with a partner, just by yourself, for fun, or even as art. Hey.
Kat blinked, surprised.
No, not really. I never even thought of doing something like that. Maybe you should try it sometime,
Searle suggested, white cloak on her back disappearing into the fog as she walked away.
I think you might just find that you have a knack for it.
Kat remained in the room long after the fog departed as well, thinking about a lot of things, even if it made her head hurt. The first thing Sten noticed, as he surveyed the mists before him, was that the sense of Santa's presence was no longer with him. Checking his hands, he noted that his fur was still red rather than brown, and raised an eyebrow. He had been one of the first of the group to agree to try fusion, and had grown accustomed to her voice in his mind whenever they did so, but though the spell had been broken before, it had never been quite like this. Now, even more wary than usual, he slowly stalked forward into the mists, ready to pull his daggers in the blink of an eye. Soon, he approached what appeared to be a dark, dead tree. After watching it for a minute, he drew closer, then circled it, finding nothing either on the other side or in the branches above. As he did, however, he heard movement behind him, and whirled around to plant his knives into the chest of himself, a perfect doppelganger who fell back, silently clutching his spurting wounds until he expired a moment later.
Cute,
Sten said flatly, once it was dead. He was slightly surprised himself that seeing that hadn't brought on any unpleasant flashbacks, but it hadn't, and there were more important things to speculate on.
Real cute. But it's going to take more than that. Where are you? I'm right here,
a child's high-pitched voice replied from above, and Sten glanced upward. On a branch that had been empty before, a short figure sat, in hooded purple robes that covered him from head to toe with a six-headed dragon on the chest. Only his hands were exposed, his fingers long and thin, clutching the branch on either side of him like blood-red spiders. In the darkness of his hood, slanted eyes and a sinister smile all glowed red as well.
You're General Sten Legacy, right? Not a general anymore,
Sten replied, frowning. Normally, he would have already thrown a knife, but something about the child on the branch made him pause.
And who are you supposed to be? Moat, the Red Dreamer, of the Dark Dragon Empire's Tiamat unit,
the boy replied, swaying back and forth slightly on his branch, as the mists changed color, becoming the same dark red as his hands.
It's nice to meet you. Oh,
Sten said slowly.
I see. You know, my old homeland actually has a biography on you. Written by a guy named Largo who used to be a major. It's really pretty good. Separates a lot of the fact from the fiction.
Sighing heavily, he dropped every one of his hidden knives before asking a rhetorical question containing at least one profanity.
I'm afraid that that's between you and your tag-along friend,
Moat replied, dropping backwards off of the branch. As he fell, a hangman's noose appeared around his neck, and he dangled from the branch with his head bent at an unnatural angle, continuing to speak.
Don't worry about her, by the way, I only moved her a little to the side, so we could do this properly. You really shouldn't ask me that kind of question, though. I was only 12 when I died. I'll keep that in mind,
Sten replied, folding his arms and making no move to retrieve his weapons.
So, how's this going to go? I know better than to try and fight you one-on-one. You do know a lot, don't you?
Moat asked, dangling in the wind.
You've seen a lot, done a lot, learned a lot. But I'll bet this is a new one, even for you.
As he spoke, more figures began to appear in the mists around them. More doppelgangers, each and every one of them Sten Legacy from different points in his life. Some of them wore various Highlander uniforms, from different stages in his career. Others were clad only in rags and tatters, and more in the kinds of armor he had started buying and wearing after joining the Dragon Kin. The worst were the children. Sten deliberately avoided looking at those.
Suppose I should just be glad that you're not throwing me back into Gunheim,
Sten muttered, retrieving his knives as the illusionary replicas began closing in around him and the tree.
Even so, has anybody ever told you you're a little bastard? Yeah, I get that a lot.
Moat reached up, tore the rope from the tree, and raised it up above his head, dragging his body higher and higher into the air by his neck.
Or I used to, anyways. But hey, this isn't about me, is it? It's about you, Mr. Legacy. I figured that much out, thanks,
Sten retorted, picking his knives back up. Surveying the crowd of clones, he chose one who wore a private's uniform at age 14 and lunged for him. Sure enough, the illusion tried to bring out his own dagger to intercept it, but at that age his reflexes had been far too slow, and it was too late to stop Sten from cutting his throat. Spinning, he lunged for the next one over, one of the bums. Unfortunately, that one was faster, and not only caught his wrist in one hand, but counterattacked with his own knife a moment later. Backing up, Sten bumped one of the children, who immediately jumped for his face, teeth bared and fingers clawing. Shoving him aside, he hesitated over the killing stroke, and then a sergeant was slashing at him as well as the bum, forcing him to run back towards the tree as they continued pressing towards him.
Right, that's not going to work,
he muttered, narrowing his eyes. They were still almost upon him, and would be within less than a minute.
Should have known. None of them might be as good as me, but most of them are close enough that I won't stand a chance 1 on 100. Good thing I didn't try using magic. Are you having trouble?
Moat called down from above before abruptly plummeting from the height he had been at. He hit the hard, packed dirt in a spray of blood, bounced and rolled, his small body twisted and broken.
Would you like a hint? Give me a minute on that,
Sten replied, pressing his back against the tree and resisting the urge to climb it.
This is a trial, right? A test. So the trick is finding the right answer. If fighting my way out isn't going to do it.
He thought about it for a moment before discarding his knives a second time.
I should have just stuck with what I was doing. Correct,
Moat said, picking himself up and resetting all of his bones, one by one, as the doppelgangers all stopped walking and stood in place.
You know the answer already, deep down, on a subconscious level. All of you do. You just don't know that you know. All we're doing is helping you figure it out. Which is good, because that's about all we can do aside from putting on a good show. We are dead, you know. So I heard.
Sten glanced over his shoulder at him.
Don't take this the wrong way, but I'm glad to hear you say it. I'd have wondered, with you guys, if you hadn't. So, now that I've done it, how about that hint, hey? I still don't know what the hell this is supposed to mean. Oh, brother.
Moat raised his hands and lowered his hood, allowing Sten to see him roll his golden eyes. He had the face of a child, young and innocent, though his ears were pointed, his blonde hair rose to a spiked peak, and his blood-red features eerie in their calmness.
For somebody so cynically wise in some ways, you're remarkably obtuse in others. The answer was to stop trying to kill yourself, Sten. I don't know how to put it any clearer than that. I'll have you know that suicide is one low that even I've never sunk to,
Sten cracked, though his heart wasn't in it. The boy's words had shaken him, loath as he was to admit it.
That's not what I meant, and you know it,
Moat admonished him.
You might not be doing that directly, but I know there have been a couple times when you weren't thinking straight, and you practically tried to get somebody else to kill you. That time in Gunheim, where death scared you so badly that you deserted to get away from it. You've never really recovered from it, and I doubt you ever will. Scars that heavy are beyond even my ability to heal. Thanks,
Sten grunted sourly.
I could have told you that. I'm still not hearing what it is I am supposed to do. It's for them, isn't it?
Moat said shrewdly.
The people you've found. You're willing to die for them, if that's what it takes. You always have been. It'd be a good way to go, wouldn't it? I know what that's like. I felt the same way, for most of my life. Ever since I was able to walk. But they don't want that. They don't want you to die for them, Sten.
Pulling his hood back up, he turned and began walking away.
They want you to live for them. To try actually feeling alive. To give yourself a second chance, and forgive yourself for what you've never been able to. Give it some thought, hey.
Sten didn't reply, this time. He simply stood there, as the pure white mists vanished, taking the dead child with them, lost in his past.
Hey, boy,
Rand groaned as the mists swirled around him, and he felt a sudden absence of Solo's presence in his mind.
I can already tell this is going to be one of those days.
Shaking his head, he walked forward, and soon found himself approaching a dead tree of a kind that he had never seen before. Putting his hands on his hips, he looked it up and down slowly.
Okay. Now what?
Raising his hands to his mouth, he shouted into the fog.
Hello? Anybody here? Behind you,
a deep voice growled. Rather than turning to look, Rand rolled forward, and felt something pass over his back as he curled up. Unrolling only a few feet away, he landed on his feet and turned to see who it was that was attacking him. What he saw was a massive sledgehammer coming towards his head from the left, and with a yelp, he stepped clumsily backwards, then did so again to avoid a second blow from the right.
You've been picking up your new line of work faster than most civilians do when they first move into it,
the giant who wielded a sledge in each hand told him, stopping his advance and standing still for a moment. Though still not quite as large as Rand, he was still the hugest human he had ever seen, although his blood-red skin and pointed ears cast some doubt on that. 8 feet tall, with a build that was equally impressive, he was wearing massive steel armor with a 6-headed dragon enameled on the breastplate that looked so heavy, even somebody of his size shouldn't have been able to move in it.
Not bad, Rand Marks. Thanks,
Rand replied, fists at his sides.
So, I have to fight you, I'm guessing. You do catch on quick,
the hulking brute said, grinning unpleasantly. His eyes were gold and fierce, like a predatory animal's, and his head was completely bald, though he didn't look all that old.
The name's Goda, the Black Warrior of the Dark Dragon Empire's Tiamat unit. Don't know if that means anything to you or not. It does, actually,
Rand said slowly, looking him over again, before adding another word, one his mother would have made him eat soap for if she had heard him say it.
Heh.
Chuckling once, Goda charged, and while he still wasn't exactly quick, he still moved far faster than anybody his size clad in that kind of armor had any right to. In only a second, he was in front of Rand, bringing one hammer down on his head while preparing a rising swing with the other. Fighting his urge to run, Rand did the exact opposite instead, and moved forward, so that the falling hammer came down upon his plated back rather than his skull. Even so, he was expecting it to hurt, and he was proven right. Even with his mammoth skin cloak, the hammer actually cracked his shell, something that had never happened before. That was enough to tell him what would happen if the other one hit his arm or his ribs, and so instead of letting that happen, he decked Goda right in the kisser with his left fist, putting his whole body into the blow. Most men, even those of his size, would have gone flying after a hit like that, but Goda simply grunted and took a step back. Fortunately, that was enough for the hammer to miss, and Rand followed up with another punch, using his right hand this time. That one made Goda lean back, but he was already swinging again, dropping low to aim for a knee this time. Rand was forced to back off, and Goda came after him, bringing his other hammer up towards his chin.
You don't hold back at all, do you?
He told the other man as he stepped away from that one as well, while watching for another opportunity to close the ground between them again.
You fight dirty right from the get-go. Holding back is for amateurs,
Goda told him, pausing for a moment and remaining where he was, 6 feet away.
I stopped holding back long before I made a name for myself with the Dark Dragon Empire. And you're a professional as well, aren't you, Mr. Marks? You sure aren't wasting any time going for anything but the face. With that rig you're wearing.
Rand looked it over meaningfully.
I can tell just by looking that I'd probably just hurt my fists, even with these babies on them. Don't really have any options but your face. Heh.
Goda laughed again, just once, short and low, before moving in on the attack once more, swinging one hammer down from above the same way as last time. Rand responded the same way as well, only realizing after he had started moving what kind of damage would likely result from being hit in the same spot a second time after his shell had already been cracked. Growling, he charged forward even further than before, and the hammer hit a little further down. While that was still painful, it wasn't debilitating, and he was able to counterattack again. The two of them continued in that fashion for some time, there in the swirling fog before the strange dead tree. Neither of them spoke again, and neither of them considered backing off in order to do so a second time. They simply remained there, facing each other and only changing their stances enough to advance or retreat slightly, as the situation required. They traded blows, hammer and fist, against each other over and over again, and despite the catastrophic amount of force put into each blow neither one of them went down. Rand's knuckles continued beating a brutal rhythm against Goda's skull, but despite numerous bruises and eventually a black eye, the Black Warrior showed no signs of faltering. At the same time, no matter how many places he managed to damage Rand's shell in, he steadfastly managed to keep Goda from hitting him anywhere else. Back and forth, the battle raged, for how long Rand had no idea, until the Black Warrior finally backed off and lowered his sledges onto the ground.
All right, that's enough,
he grunted, smiling again, this time in what looked more like approval than anticipation.
No arguments here,
Rand said, lowering his arms as well.
I'm not cut out for doing this sort of thing too often.
Bull, Goda told him flatly, though his smile remained.
That's your problem, Rand Marks. You still haven't grown accustomed to the way your life has changed over this last year. You think of yourself as just another runaway, a farmer's son who's done nothing else his whole life and doesn't have anything going for him but brute strength and a natural talent for white magic. Does that sound right? I'd say you nailed it,
Yeah, Rand admitted, crossing his arms.
So what? It's the truth. That's who I am. No point in tiptoeing around it. Again, bull,
Goda repeated.
You know who I was. I know you do. Your reaction made that much clear. And yet you were going head to head and blow to blow with me. You kept up, the whole time. It doesn't matter who would have won in the end. All I needed to see, and all you needed to know, was that that was even in question at all. You didn't think about it, didn't try to talk me out of it. You just went straight for the kill. Like a professional, which is what you are now, whether you're willing to accept that or not. It wasn't like I had any other choice,
Rand argued, shaking his head.
If I fail this trial, that means everybody else does, too, doesn't it? And the chief won't get this Agni Anfani thing. So I had to do it. Otherwise, I'd let them down. You think the world of them, don't you?
Goda pressed.
All of them. The young ones and the old ones, the men and the women, the serious folks and the clowns.
His eyes fixed on Rand's, and that hunter's gleam was still in them.
Don't lie. Heh. Tell me how you feel. Only because I have to, asshole,
Rand shot back before rubbing a hand ruefully over the top of his head.
Yeah, okay. Honestly? They're the most amazing people I've ever met. All of them. I think they can actually do it, you know? Slay a god. Don't know how a guy like me got mixed up with all this, but I'll see it out. And that's what you're missing, Rand Marks,
Goda said, picking up his hammers and walking away without looking back.
They all feel the exact same way about you. Every one of them. Perhaps you should try actually thinking about why they do, instead of just brushing it off.
Even after the mists had faded away into nothingness, and Goda with them, it was some time before Rand noticed that all of his injuries had healed themselves, as if they had never happened at all.
Well,
Nina murmured, watching the mists creep around her.
I can't say this is what I was expecting, but then I wasn't really trying to predict what would happen, so that's not saying much.
Despite her calm words, she was prepared to start casting at a moment's notice as her wings carried her forward through the fog. Her ability to sense magic seemed to be nullified at the moment. Not only could she not detect anything in the room, she was unable to feel the numerous sources outside either. In addition, Spoo was no longer present in her mind, another ominous sign. Soon, she saw two things up ahead of her, both entering her line of sight at the same time. The first was a tree, long dead but still standing, towering over both her and the other inhabitant of the room, who she had also seen. She was clad in grey from head to toe, light robes with sleeves that hid her hands and a great hood that covered her face in shadows. It was only through close examination of her movement as she walked forward that Nina could tell she was a woman at all. The front of her robes bore the insignia of a six-headed dragon, and a green pendant dangled from her neck.
Unless I'm mistaken, that pendant you wear is the mark of identification given to a sworn priest or priestess of Loden,
Nina observed as the other woman continued to approach.
I take it, then, that you are here to conduct this trial. That's correct, Princess Nina Windia,
she replied. Her voice was surprisingly warm and friendly, light and young and full of life. Raising her hands to her hood, she lowered it, revealing her head. She looked to be in her mid-20s, pale and beautiful with long blue hair held back by a yellow band. She was smiling peacefully, but despite her placid appearance, something in her calm green eyes made Nina tense up warily.
I won't be able to stay long, but I'm glad to meet you, even if it's only for a short time. You know me,
Nina said cautiously, wings beating, making no effort to approach the woman.
If you don't mind, I would like to be able to say the same. Oh, of course,
the woman agreed, making a face.
Where are my manners? My grandparents would be so disappointed in me.
Dipping a hand inside her robes, she bowed, still meeting Nina's eyes.
My name is Sarah, Silver Priestess of the Tiamat unit.
Ah, Nina murmured, recognizing the name, before adding a word she had heard quite often, but rarely used herself.
Now, that's hardly appropriate, Nina,
Sarah admonished her before moving. In the blink of an eye she was standing before her, and from inside her robes she had produced a rapier which was already moving towards Nina's heart. Her voice remained calm, but in that instant, her cheerful smile had erupted into a psychotic grin, as her eyes danced.
Choice of language aside, I am your grandaunt, you know.
The only thing that saved Nina was halting her wings and dropping like a rock. Even so, the rapier still came for her face as she fell, and though she moved her head to the side, it still cut into her cheek. Before Sarah could prepare another thrust, she countered with the strongest bolt of lightning she knew how to create, a tree-trunk thick pillar of electricity that blazed down towards the Silver Priestess. Glancing up at it for only a moment, her maniacal leer still frozen on her features, Sarah dashed backwards and away, as it pursued her unrelentingly.
I see that you're not as harmless as you look,
Nina commented, preparing a blast from her focusing ring. It wouldn't do much damage, if it did at all, but it would hopefully give Sarah enough pause for her to cast another spell if she got close a second time.
Not that that's particularly surprising. Fortunately for me, neither am I. Oh, I never believed for a second that you were, Nina,
Sarah assured her, suddenly darting to the side and then past the bolt of lightning before dashing towards Nina again.
Even your ancestor, the one who married my brother, was fearsome in battle by the end of her journey, despite specializing in healing magic. I expect no less of one whose talents lie in destruction. I'm glad to hear you have such confidence in me,
Nina replied dryly as she summoned up 3 raging arcs of flame, each ending in a grasping hand that reached out for Sarah as they bore down on her.
I assure you, it's entirely earned,
Sarah told her, changing her course and moving to the side. The flaming limbs followed her, but their arc carried them into the ground before they could catch her, and she continued around them.
Although I doubt you'll believe me that easily. I do have an issue with accepting the honesty of those who try to kill me, I'll admit,
Nina agreed, summoning up a snarling wolf created entirely from ice magic, which leapt towards Sarah, fangs bared.
Oh, you know that's not what I'm talking about at all,
Sarah said reprovingly, stopping and staring at the approaching wolf. After a moment, her blade began to glow with a strange white light, and then she moved again, dashing towards her opponent.
I'm talking about your actions, not mine. That cold, cynical sarcasm of yours. It's a shield, isn't it? You use it to avoid showing your true face to those who you don't trust. You're afraid of them finding out just how insecure you really are. I was wondering if this was to be solely a physical trail,
Nina murmured, wings beating again and carrying her back up into the air as she watched wolf and priestess collide.
That didn't seem quite right. I suppose it only makes sense that a psychological evaluation is the real point. I hate to disappoint you, but you're not telling me anything I don't know. I accepted that part of myself quite some time ago. It's simply who I am, and there's no point in wishing otherwise. You see, that's what I'm talking about,
Sarah told her, still grinning madly as she plunged her blade into the wolf's head. For a moment, Nina was stunned by the sheer insanity of that action, but then she realized that it had somehow worked. The wolf was dissolving, the magic that gave it shape and form dispelled, and Sarah was coming for her once more.
You've resigned yourself to always being that way, which is why you haven't even noticed just how much you've changed recently. You have, you know. Is that so?
Nina watched her approach, judging her timing perfectly, before detonating the atmosphere around her. As much as it sickened her to emulate how Habaruko had fought Tika, practicality was more important, and it was an effective method. She watched Sarah hit the floor, robes torn and skin blasted, before she continued.
Do tell. I know you're still conscious. You are good,
Sarah murmured, raising her head. Despite the damage she had taken, she had reverted to her earlier, calmer smile.
And yes, I am, although one-on-one physical combat was never really my specialty.
Rising back to her feet with some effort, she put her sword away, the sheath under her outer robes now visible through the damage.
Really?
Nina replied, somewhat dubiously.
I seem to recall you having other preferences in combat, but that simply begs the question of why you don't use them. For one, I'm afraid the breath of fire is no longer available to me,
Sarah explained.
Being dead will do that. As for my trademark spell, well, it is defensive, and I didn't really feel like trying to goad you into attacking it. This seemed much faster, and more fun, even if I'm not really very good at it.
For a moment, a trace of madness flickered in her eyes again, but only a moment.
And more likely to provoke the desired reaction, as well. Which was?
Nina raised an eyebrow.
Determination,
Sarah replied, her voice still warm and caring.
You fought for your life automatically, on instinct rather than on conscious decision. You didn't always, you know. How many times did you try to commit suicide when you were younger, after you were banished from your home and family? That's none of your business,
Nina said quickly, coldly.
And besides, that was a long time ago. It was,
Sarah agreed, turning away, though she continued looking at Nina over her shoulder.
And you've changed, more than you know. You've found happiness again, but you won't admit it to yourself. You still think of yourself as the broken bird you were a year ago. You're not, great niece. You're strong, now, in both skill and in spirit. Now, you want to live, and to continue living, with those you've found. The sooner you accept that, the easier you'll find it to smile again. You should, you know. It really does feel nice.
Soon, the mists were gone, taking the Silver Priestess with them. But Nina remained, wings beating and thoughts pensive.
Hoo boy,
Bao muttered as he took in the mist around him, along with the fact that his ability to sense magic had gone dead, and the absence of Senni's voice in his mind.
Yeah, this is probably going to suck. Is that a tree over there?
Calmly checking his crossbow, he made sure it was all in working order before making his way towards it. Before he drew near, however, his instincts went off, and he dove to the side just in time to avoid a descending axe that would have come down right on his skull.
Well, your senses are sharp,
A deep, growling voice told him, full of arrogance and scorn.
I'll give you that much. I'm grateful for the praise,
Bao retorted, scrambling back to his feet and doing his best to run backwards. Whoever it was, they were massively built, and clad from head to toe in black plate mail that looked more like volcanic rock than metal, with a dragon's head helmet.
Really? You should be,
the other man told him, raising his head. He met Bo's eyes and smiled faintly. His own eyes belonged to nothing human, they were like blazing coals, burning red and orange and yellow without pupil or iris. Despite his visorless helmet, he also wore a black iron crown around his forehead, pressed tightly into his flesh by the weight of the steel. He had a short beard, bright red without a trace of gray despite the lines on his face, and his double-headed axe was massive.
I don't give compliments out very often, and never to the unworthy. See previous statement, only without the sarcasm this time, I guess,
Bao replied, stopping. He was far enough away that the enemy wouldn't be able to reach him with a surprise attack like that again, but still kept his finger on the trigger of his crossbow.
You know, I feel like I should know you, but I can't really place it. Should I? I should hope so, although this is the first time we've met, Bao Dogi,
the other man said with a dark chuckle.
I did make quite the mark upon the world when I was alive, after all. I am Zog, the last of his name, Emperor of the Dark Dragons. And until you leave this room, you are under my tutelage. Oh,
Bao whispered, before adding a four-letter word, screaming and running.
An appropriate reaction.
Zog nodded as if it had been a respectful method of address, before leaping dozens of feet into the air, soaring higher than should have been possible in both height and length, clearly intending to bring his axe down on Bo's head once more. Cursing again, Bao turned his head and arms even as he continued to run and fired his crossbow, and though shot after shot clinked off of Zog's armor, none of them gave the Emperor even the slightest pause. At the last second, Bao dove away again, and though he tried scrambling back to his feet again instantly, Zog lashed out with the axe in a horizontal swipe. The initial blow had been a feint, and though it only scraped him, the searing pain as the blade carved through the flesh and muscle on the backs of his legs was still enough to send Bao tumbling onto his face.
Why do you run?
Zog asked, looming over him, as Bao frantically muttered the words of a healing spell.
Do you not believe yourself worthy of facing me?
Bao muttered as the healing took effect, turning around to look at him again. Rather than attacking further, Zog was simply watching him, though he still held his axe in one gauntlet hand.
Well, you see, the thing is, there's a couple problems with that. Do go on,
Zog told him, smiling.
First off, there's the fact that you're, well, you,
Bao told him, cringing theatrically.
Hope I don't really have to explain that one any further. Normally, I would suspect flattery, but for some reason I believe your words are genuine,
Zog told him, looking amused.
It seems I made even more of an impression upon history than I thought. And here I had believed that my ever-faithful friends in the Tiamat unit would have overshadowed me. By all means, go on. Secondly, I might be a pro, but I'm supposed to be a healer,
Bao pointed out, scratching the back of his head and glancing away.
I fail to see your point,
Zog told him, sounding disapproving now.
My own Tiamat unit counted among its numbers an alchemist and a priestess. Neither are skills one would believe to be combat-oriented, and yet the world trembled in fear at their very names. Why should I not expect the same of you, who will follow in the footsteps of those who slew both them and I? Yeah, maybe,
Bao admitted.
But guys like me, when we do fight.
Still looking away, he fired his crossbow, aimed at Zog's exposed face, the automatic weapon continuing without need of reloading.
We have to be kind of sneaky about it, you know.
Without looking to see what damage he had done, he scrambled back to his feet and ran once more, muttering the words of a spell to increase his own durability as he did. He had expected a bellow of rage, but when he heard as he ran was even worse, laughter, deep and dark and approving. Glancing over his shoulder, he swore under his breath as he saw Zog leaping for him again, axe raised high overhead. From that distance, he couldn't see how much damage he had done, but it obviously hadn't been enough. Muttering under his breath, he realized that there was only one possibility that came to mind, and despite the fact that it was really stupid, it was probably his only chance at this point. When Zog came down, Bao was ready. Instead of diving to the side as he had before, he whirled around at the last second and dove forward, underneath the descending axe and straight into Zog in a full-body tackle. The Emperor grunted in surprise and went down, tumbling backwards, though his axe remained in his grasp. Unsurprisingly, a moment later he bashed Bao upside the head with the haft, but Bao resolutely climbed to his knees atop Zog's chest and aimed his crossbow at his face.
Like I said, I fight dirty,
he told him, panting heavily, before taking a good look at his target and blinking.
Whoa. Oh, come now,
Zog replied, smiling despite the hideous wreck the automatic crossbow had made of his features. One had apparently gone straight through his left cheek, shattering several teeth, though the shaft itself was absent. Several other, lesser wounds were visible, but the worst was the one that was still sunk into his right eye.
You've seen worse. Yeah, but usually only on corpses,
Bao told him, keeping his grip on his crossbow tight despite his shock.
Lose the axe, unless you want to die twice. I'm afraid that threat is hardly an incentive,
Zog told him, but he did throw the axe away.
However, my point has been adequately proven. Now I'm the one who's hearing flattery,
Bao commented, slowly backing off, though he kept his crossbow steady, even without the axe. He didn't want to find out firsthand how good Zog was at unarmed combat.
Simple fact,
Zog replied, shaking his head.
You have pride, I will grant you, but not as much as you deserve. Even here and now, in a place such as this with a task such as yours, you place far greater merit on another than yourself.
Reaching up, he pulled the bolt in his eye out without so much as cringing.
Well, yeah,
Bao said, frowning now.
That's the way it goes, isn't it? Ryu's the one. He's the hero, the descendant of heroes, and all that. So what? That doesn't mean I'm not gonna back him up all the way. You may have to do more than that,
Zog advised him, standing again. Without so much as looking Bo's way again, he walked over to his axe.
Put aside all concern as to which of you leads your group. It is unimportant. You are all equally necessary. What do you mean?
Bao asked suspiciously as Zog retrieved his weapon.
It was not the man named Ryu who slew me, in the end,
Zog told him, even as he walked away, back straight and face forward.
It was one who shared a name, half a clan, and a similarity of weapon to you who scored the killing blow on me. His second in command, and most trusted comrade aside from his women. Had he not done so, I would have slain them, one and all. You are all equally necessary. Had you died before now, all hope would have been lost, for your friends and for the world. And in time, after you are gone, your children and their children will be the line of legends. Remember that, Bao Dogi.
Bao watched him walk away, and watched the mists fade after him, but still he kept his crossbow leveled at where the Emperor's back had been.
How very strange,
Jean murmured, looking around the room filled with mist.
I was not entirely sure what to expect, and yet, this was not a possibility I had considered. What do you think, Siso?
He waited for her response, and when none came, blinked.
Siso? Are you sleeping, mademoiselle?
It was only then that he frowned, realizing what had happened.
Even more strange, yes, Jean? It seems I truly am meant to undergo this trial alone.
Before he could consider the situation further, a sound caught his attention. It sounded like somebody was whistling, up ahead, although the tune was not one he was familiar with. For a moment, he considered drawing his rapier, but decided instead to simply keep his hand on the hilt as he proceeded into the fog, ready to draw at a moment's notice. He also made an effort to keep the words to the most powerful offensive spell he knew on his mind, so that he wouldn't have to waste precious seconds remembering what they were if he were attacked. Soon, something grew visible in the fog ahead, a dead tree, alone and motionless. At least, so Jean thought, until he saw something else. Somebody was sitting on the largest branch, legs dangling, and from the sound of it he was the one who was whistling. Seeing him made up Jean's mind, and he did draw his blade, before creeping closer.
Oh, hello there.
The man called down, smiling, as Jean drew close enough to see him clearly. He was an average, unremarkable-looking young human, in his mid-twenties by appearance. His hair was an untidy, honey-colored mop, and he wore a shirt, vest, and leggings made of rough wool and burlap, indicating a humble life. There was no sign of any sort of weapon on him, and his eyes were friendly and guileless.
You can put your sword away. I'm not here to fight you. I am glad to hear it, mon ami,
Jean replied, sheathing his sword. The young man had given him no reason to doubt his word.
I believe this is meant to be a trial for me, and such things are seldom peaceful, to my vast regret, yes. I'm guessing most of them won't be, so you're right on the money there.
The the young man agreed.
Fortunately, I'm not very good at that sort of thing. The first time I ever actually got in a fight in my life. Well, it turned out to be the last time, too, to put it lightly. Then you are one of the deceased.
Jean raised a hairless eyebrow.
Forgive me if this is impolite, monsieur, but I must say, you do not look dead. I'll take that as a compliment,
the man replied, chuckling lightly.
It's because we're in here. Things work a little differently in this place. You might have noticed on account of how you and all your friends walked through the same door, but ended up in different rooms. That did strike me as somewhat odd as well, yes,
Jean admitted. He was growing tired of craning his neck, so he began climbing the tree, and soon made it up to the branch, where he took a seat next to the young man.
Allow me introduce myself, then, so that we might be friends, yes? My name is Prince Ikaru Hapi di Tapeda, but please, call me Jean. Sounds like a good idea to me,
the young man said, still smiling.
My name's Alan. Common, I know, but I always liked it. It is a good name,
Jean told him, offering a hand, and Alan shook it.
So then, Monsieur Alan. Despite our mutual preference for peace, you are here in order to administer this trial for me, are you not? Yeah, that's my job,
Alan agreed, nodding.
To be honest, I was surprised they asked me to, but apparently there's 8 of you guys, so I was the only guy they had for the last slot. I hope I do it right, I'm not really used to this sort of thing like the others. I am sure you will do fine, mon ami,
Jean said encouragingly.
You are a good man, with a good heart, and that is what is most important, yes. I try to be,
Alan replied.
Thanks, Jean. And you're right, too. That's what your greatest strength is, you know. I mean no insult to your friends, but you're the best of them, morally speaking. Do not worry, Monsieur Alan,
Jean assured him.
I am not so easy to offend, although I must respectively disagree. Though each of us has their own system of morality, I do not consider my own to be better or worse than any of theirs. We each simply see the world in a different way, and it is those differences that define who we are, is it not? I suppose so, yes,
Alan said after a moment's thought.
Perhaps I should have said that you're the most altruistic of them, then, as well as the most optimistic. Do I truly seem that way?
Jean asked wistfully.
In truth, mon ami, I can be as selfish as any man or woman. I simply have a more subtle means of exhibiting my selfishness than most. Boy, do I know what that's like,
Alan replied, chuckling slightly as he glanced at his dangling feet.
Back when I was alive, there was only one thing I really wanted. But that one thing. I never gave up on it, not after 10 years, and after everything had changed. In the end, it's what got me killed. Although I did get something of a second chance, and that time I managed to get it right. This thing of which you speak.
Jean said slowly, trusting his intuition.
It was the heart of a woman, was it not? Yeah, it was.
Alan nodded, meeting his eyes again. His were calm and brown, without a trace of anger in them.
The most beautiful woman in the world. I guess what I'm saying is, sometimes it's okay to be selfish. We're only mortal, after all. We're not perfect, and we shouldn't have to be. I am glad that you agree, Monsieur Alan,
Jean told him, smiling as well.
I am well aware of my own imperfections, and I accept them. It is simply part of life, yes. Life, and afterlife,
Alan joked.
You see, though, that's what I'm here to talk to you about. You're incredibly talented, Jean. Your fencing skills are a match for the Queen of the Sky herself, and you've got some talent in black, white, and grey magic to back that up. You're eloquent, charismatic, and good-looking. You're a talented artist, and a musician as well. That girl of yours, Siso, is all over you for a reason, and it's not because you fuse with her, or because you're a prince. But because of all of that, when you do feel your own shortcomings, you're harder on yourself than most people. I do not understand,
Jean said, frowning now.
Is it not natural for a man to feel regret for failing to meet the standards expected of him? A little,
Alan admitted.
That's just part of having a healthy emotional range. But you take it a little too far. Hebarak is a good example. You still feel bad about what you did to him, instead of just ending it quickly and cleanly. I can understand that, even if he really did have that coming more than anybody else in the world, but it's done. It's in the past. If it affects you that much, then make sure you don't ever do that again, but don't dwell on it forever. That's not like you. Yes, well.
Jean took his turn to look down at his feet.
As of recent days, I have not been feeling much like myself. That's the problem, Jean,
Alan told him, putting a hand on his shoulder.
Because your morals are out of line with the rest of your team, you've been feeling like you're the one in the wrong, and you've been trying to be more like them. But they don't want that, Jean. Any of them. They like you for who you are, and your beliefs are part of that. Don't be afraid to disagree with them. They'd feel better if you did try and talk them into making the right decision, instead of following along if your heart wasn't in it, you know.
Monsieur Alan, Jean said slowly, as he considered the other man's words.
You are no ordinary man, are you? Who are you, truly? I'm the most ordinary man in the world, actually,
Alan replied, hopping off the branch.
It's the rest of my friends that aren't. And speaking of which, I should really get going. Searle's probably done by now, and she'll be waiting for me. Alan and Searle.
Jean murmured, eyes widening.
You are that Alan? Of the Fusion clan. Oh, you do know me.
Alan paused, looking back over his shoulder.
Hey. That's cool. Anyways, give it some thought, yeah.
Sticking his hands in his pockets, he walked away, whistling before Jean could recover enough to tell him about the tragedy. Their romance was still known across the world as one he had seen performed on stage 1,000 times. Lost in thought, he remained there for some time, until the fog vanished, taking the tree he was sitting on with it. Fortunately, he was used to painful landings by now.
All right,
Ryu said flatly, looking around him as the mist swirled.
Get out here, whoever you are.
No response came, and after a minute he lost his patience and stalked forward, grumbling under his breath. Soon, he saw a dead tree ahead, and a man standing calmly in front of it, watching him approach. Walking over, he looked him up and down before speaking again.
I take it you're the one who's going to be taking care of this trial business for me. Indeed I am,
the man replied calmly, his voice deep and cold. His plate mail was made of gold with a 6-headed dragon enameled on the breastplate, and the cape he wore over it pure, snowy white. His only other adornment, aside from the sword at his waist, was a jade pendant he wore around his neck. His long hair was golden, and his pale features almost unnaturally handsome, but there was something chilling in his empty purple eyes and amused smirk.
My name is Jade, the Gold Lord, of the Dark Dragon Empire's Tiamat unit. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance.
Oh, Ryu said slowly, glancing at the other man's sword again and seeing that the hilt matched his own. A moment passed, and then he added an expletive.
I see my reputation still precedes me, even 1,000 years later,
Jade murmured.
Relax, young man. I am here to talk, to explain to you what must be done, and nothing more. Is that supposed to be reassuring?
Ryu met his eyes, defiance returning in spite of or perhaps because of his fear.
Because historians wrote down what happened when you did that, too, Ice Lord. You know, it's been a very long time, since anybody's called me that,
Jade told him, still sounding dryly amused.
Either to my face, or to my back. Regardless of your opinions on the matter, Ryu, here we stand. You require the power of Agni Anfani, do you not? And I am the one who has been charged with instructing you on how to obtain it? Fine.
Ryu crossed his arms.
Then cut to the chase. What do I have to do? The power of Agni Anfani is the power of Loden himself,
Jade explained, spreading his arms dramatically.
By using it, you will become an incarnation of Loden, the physical embodiment of him in this world, for a short time. That much power comes at a high price, Ryu. In order to receive, one must first give, and the exchange must be equivalent. A sacrifice is required, the greatest of all. Your immediate predecessor could not attain that state of being until after he had slain his beloved sister, my magnificent silver priestess, who he had challenged the world in order to save. Yeah, I heard that part of the story, too,
Ryu growled, temper deteriorating further.
And I've got a sister. But I'm not killing her, no matter how annoying she is, and anyways, she's not even here. Oh, no.
Jade wagged a finger.
But others are. You see, Ryu, the source of a god's power is belief. Faith. Without true belief, a god is powerless. Sarah believed in her brother's destiny with all her heart and soul, which is why she forced him to kill her. She knew what even I did not, somehow. That faith in him became the power of Agni Anfani. And so, in order to attain that power, you must sacrifice one who believes in you to a similar extent. There are 8 options, here in Infinity, but only one is necessary. Which one it shall be is entirely up to you. Are you telling me that one of my team has to die, in order to acquire this power?
Ryu asked, resisting the urge to tear his sword from his sheath and hack the man standing before him to bits.
And you will be the one who chooses who it will be,
Jade said, nodding slightly, his features still frozen in that same smirk.
As a matter of fact. Here they come, now.
Somebody else was emerging from the mists. It was Bao.
Don't say anything, buddy,
he said, before Ryu could speak. Meeting his eyes, he continued, voice level.
Just pick me, and don't tell the others, hey? Let me do this.
He smiled slightly.
Just this once. Let me be the hero, okay? Bao,
Ryu murmured, but his oldest friend was already turning and walking away into the mist, even as Nina approached from another direction.
Wait,
Jade advised him calmly.
Hear them out, before you speak. Simply listen.
Ryu, she murmured, her eyes peaceful.
This isn't the first time I've considered something like this. Many times, when I was younger, I thought it would be best for everybody if I just disappeared. Something always kept me from actually going through with it, though. And now, I can do it for the exact opposite reason. I can die for a greater cause, for this world I always hated, and the people who showed me how to love it instead. I want to do this, Ryu. For you. Please, let me be the one.
Smiling sadly, the way he had always loved, she turned and flew away as Kat took her place.
Hey, Ryu,
she said, more quiet and calm than usual for her.
Before this happens, I kind of realized there's something I never told you, back in Corsair.
She smiled then, in the unconscious, cheerful way that had always captivated him.
Thank you. For everything. I would have died there, if it hadn't been for you. Everything I've seen and done since then. I owe you all of that. That's why I figure I should be the one. I owe you my life, Ryu. It's about time I paid that debt back, you know.
Without waiting for a response, she left as well.
Hey, Ryu,
Dee said, slithering forward on the snake's tail that he was already accustomed to, despite knowing her for far longer in her human disguise.
I know this is total bullshit, but that's the way it goes sometimes. It's gotta be done. All there is to it.
She winked at him.
So throw em for a loop. Pick me, and watch them all go nuts when I actually go through with it. The rest of you all still have most of your lives ahead of you, but I've had more than my fair share already. And it was a good life, you know? No regrets. Plus, hey, I always did want to go out making trouble.
Chief, Sten grunted, scratching the back of his head and look away as Dee's left.
This is kind of a rough situation, so I'm just gonna say what I think you would, if this was going the other way around.
He met Ryu's eyes then, resolute.
Use my life however you see fit, for the benefit of the group. We're both professionals. We knew the risks when we signed on. It's been an honor.
Saluting, he departed as well.
Ryu, mon ami,
Jean said quietly, for once, he wasn't smiling.
It is monumentally unfair, for me to ask this of you, I know. But the truth of the matter is, I can imagine no greater pain that I could feel, than to lose one of us, now. It is selfish of me, but I would truly prefer to die myself, rather than suffer the death of another of our fellowship. I hope, someday, you can forgive me.
He bowed, deeply, before walking away.
You know, it's funny.
Rand chuckled as he loomed out of the fog.
When this first started, I figure I was going to end up being the babysitter, you know. Watching out for all you kids. But then I realized. That's why you were the guy in charge. Because you were always the one who was doing that, even with me. I don't have anything to worry about, with you looking out for the others. I'll leave that to you. So you leave this to me, hey? And I'll trust you dang kids to handle the rest.
He laughed again as he strode off. Ryu, Spar greeted him, as calm as ever.
I won't waste time. As you know, my clan's emotional capacity is severely limited, and if necessary, we are capable of completely suspending emotion whatsoever. Thus, what I am about to tell you is purely logical. I am the member of our group who we can most easily dispense with, and the one whose loss will be easiest for the others to move past. Thus, I advise you to choose me. It will be best for everybody. There you have it, then,
Jade said, as Spar left.
Well? Who's it going to be, Ryu Battison?
Ryu didn't answer him, at first. He closed his eyes, deep in thought, as he considered the situation at hand. He thought about everything he knew about the trials, and about his destiny, and those of his friends. He thought about what each of them had said, the points they had made, and he thought about everything he knew about them, about who they were and how they had changed since he had come to know them. In the end, the conclusion was obvious.
Yeah, no.
Opening his eyes, he glared at Jade.
Nice try, but I'm calling bullshit. That wasn't them. Any of them. You're good, but not good enough. Maybe before they signed on, they would have said those things, but now? Nah. None of them would have said what those fakes did. Not here, not now, and not to me. Are you quite sure?
Jade arched an eyebrow, his face still frozen in that arrogant smirk.
Although it doesn't really matter. The point still stands, and a sacrifice must still be made. One of your number must die, in order to acquire Agni Anthony, and you must still choose who it will be.
He reached out to put a hand on his shoulder.
I'm sure it must be hard. The friends who... Don't touch me,
Ryu spat, knocking his arm away before crossing his arms.
Fine. One of us has to die? Okay. I'll do it. I pick myself. You haven't been listening,
Jade told him, still smug.
The sacrifice is for the purpose of using that person's utter trust, faith, and belief in you to power Agni Anthony. Even if you were not the only member of your company to possess the breath of fire in the first place. You still don't truly believe in yourself at all, do you? No,
Ryu admitted.
I don't.
Taking the dragon's tear in his hand, he pointed it at himself, and watched it turn a fiery orange, the same color of apathy and distrust that it had always shown when he had done so.
I've tried, but I just can't see it. Me, a hero? Saving the world from Saint Eva? Yeah, right. I'm a no-good street orphan who's good at killing things. Like that's impressive. But see. If what you're saying is true, I'm the only one who thinks that. If the others all believe in me, chances are, they're right and I'm wrong. So even if I can't believe in myself, I can still believe in them, believing in me. That's not quite how it works,
Jade replied after a moment, blinking.
Too bad.
Ryu shrugged, still staring at the dragon's tear.
It's what I'm going with. My mind's made up, Jade. In other words, you find yourself unable to choose,
Jade said slowly.
It's true, they are all wonderful friends. I'm sure you'll laugh, knowing my history as well as you do. But I understand your feelings. But they understand as well, Ryu. That is why they are all prepared to give their lives for you. Now stop acting childish, be realistic, and make a decision. Yeah, sure, whatever,
Ryu grunted, not even looking at him.
Already did. Now who's not listening, hey? I retract my earlier statement,
Jade told him, a note of irritation finally entering his cold voice.
Now you're being childish. Stop being such a petulant brat. If you're believing in their belief in you, as you put it, then you know you're the destined one. Start acting like it. This is for the salvation of the entire world. They understand that, so why can't you? Choose, Ryu. Screw you,
Ryu replied, flipping him the bird for additional emphasis.
How many times do I have to say it? I choose me. You utter fool,
Jade snarled, openly contemptuous now.
You risk everything with your stubbornness. You're losing sight of your destiny, now of all times, when you're this close to your final victory, and your freedom from fate. Idiot. What is this, some valiant attempt at storybook heroism? You know better than anybody that that's not how the world works. Evans will slaughter you if your heart is this weak. Now choose. Yeah, this is getting old,
Ryu said, yawning. Sitting down, he stretched out on his back, arms folded under his head.
I'm gonna take a nap. Wake me up when you're ready to actually go through with it, will you? You.
Jade seethed.
You worthless incompetent. It seems you were right all along. You could never slay a god. The world is doomed because of your actions, but you will not be there to see it. As you wish, you will be the first to fall, here and now.
He drew his sword, bringing it down on Ryu's neck with both hands.
A pity, to see Lauden's line come to such a pathetic conclusion. Die.
Ryu didn't move an inch, even as he felt the steel slice cleanly through his neck. And so, Ryu Battison of the town of Gate died.
Heh,
he muttered, staring up at the still-moving fog.
That freaking hurt. I should certainly hope so,
Jade replied, back to his normal, arrogant calm instantly. Bending over, he nonchalantly cleaned his blade with Ryu's hair.
Decapitations have a tendency to do that, in my experience. So I noticed,
Ryu said flatly, as he felt his neck start to reattach.
Okay, I'll bite. Why am I not dead? For the same reason I stand before you, despite my own demise 1,000 years past,
Jade explained, as they both stood up again.
In this room, the rules of life and death are suspended. In truth, I and all of my friends are not truly here. Everything that we have done is only an illusion, and everything that we have said is only what each of you already knows, if only subconsciously. All we've been doing is helping you realize what you couldn't, or wouldn't, by yourselves. Everything else that I said was a deliberate deception, to distract you from the real meaning of this test.
Hey. Ryu thought about that for a moment.
So is there some sort of common thread? Isn't that how that usually goes in stories? Actually, yes.
Jade nodded.
Of course, the specifics of the matter are highly variable, and yet, all are similar at the core. Agni Infinite does require belief, but that belief must be of all who take part in it. You must see yourself as your friends see you, and they must see themselves as you and each other see them. You have had hard lives, and because of that, you are reluctant to accept part of yourself. A different part, for each of you, but a part that is there, for good or for ill. That is the truth of this trial, Ryu Battison. Sounds complicated,
Ryu said, frowning again.
But I think I get it. Kind of. Good.
Jade put a hand on his shoulder again, and this time Ryu didn't knock it away.
So long as you can do that, even Evans himself will fall before you, as his mother fell before your ancestors and their companions, who slew me as well.
His arrogant smile turned slightly wry.
Loudon knows I had it coming, by then. Yeah, you kind of did, from what I know,
Ryu agreed.
You seem to be taking it fairly well, all things considered. Some men belong dead,
Jade replied with a sigh.
It brings me no joy to admit that, but it's true. I brought nothing but pain and suffering to the world while I lived, and the fact that I was manipulated into it by the goddess of lies is no excuse. Nor is the fact that in order to do so, I needed to order a 5-year-old child to lobotomize me and remove my capacity for emotion, so that I would be able to sacrifice my closest friends without a qualm when the time came, him among them. No. Peace after death is more than I deserve. Maybe,
Ryu said, shaking his head.
I try not to judge. I see somebody who's got it coming, I kill them. After that, it's none of my business. And you consider yourself no hero?
Jade asked quietly.
I'm a work in progress.
Ryu shrugged.
Are we done here, then? Indeed we are.
Jade bowed his head, removing his hand, as figures began to approach out of the fog for a second time, this time all 8 at once, from different directions.
Hey, buddy,
Bao said, smiling slightly sheepishly.
This is a hell of a place we've come to, hey? You know, I still can't believe we're actually doing this. But I've got your back. All the way to the end of the world. I don't really get it, myself,
Kat admitted, looking pensive for a moment.
I'm a brawler. I know how to fight, and that's about it.
She smiled then.
But hey, that's what we're here for, right? If I can help you guys out, that's good enough for me. I've been thinking,
Nina said quietly.
If I hadn't met you all, and joined you, I'd probably have spent my entire life sheltered, locking myself away from the rest of the world. But now, after everything I've seen and done in this journey, all I want is to keep on doing that. To stay with all of you, and see the world, like I never could before. It's been fun, hasn't it?
Deez asked, smiling.
Even more fun than I thought it would be. I may not have gone through this trial like the rest of you, for a couple of reasons. But I've still been doing some thinking of my own. Right now, though. All that matters is that I'm with you guys. I don't really know how to put this,
Sten told Ryu cautiously.
The thing is, one day, I decided that I didn't want to be a soldier anymore. To fight for my life. But being with you guys, I think I've actually found a cause that's worth doing that again.
He smiled, and his orange eyes glinted.
No more screwing around, you know? I'm playing for keeps, now. This is something we must do,
Jean said, looking surprisingly thoughtful.
I may sound foolish, but I do not truly believe that mortal men are capable of absolute evil, by themselves. Simply weakness, which can be turned to evil by the actions of others. That is why we must slay Evans. So that he can no longer corrupt anybody else, ever again. I hope that makes sense, mon amis. We're really something, aren't we, guys?
Rand asked, chuckling.
I know this sounds crazy, but I actually think we can do this. This Agni Anfani stuff. I have come to realize that there are things in this world that cannot fully be explained by logic alone,
Spar told them all gravely.
Emotions, no matter how strange they are to me, are necessary. That, more than anything, is what will save this world. And I will be part of that, with all of my soul. This is your power, Ryu Batison,
Jade told him, his own violet eyes showing something that almost looked like approval.
The power of Agni Anfani. Your belief in each other, and your desire to remain together. To live in this world, together. Remember that, Ryu. Remember what you learned here, today. Remember that you learned how to live. I will,
Ryu told him quietly.
Tell the others for me. Thanks. Even if you were all assholes.
Kat said after a moment.
Ryu? Who are you talking to? Nobody at all, young lady,
Jade replied, as the fog and the tree both faded away, and he vanished with them, melting into the air and vanishing like a hallucination.
You wear my sword well, Ryu. I'm glad to see that it has found an owner more deserving than I. Take good care of it. Ryu.
Bao asked, frowning.
Buddy? Is somebody else here? No.
Ryu shook his head.
Nobody at all.
Far beneath the surface of the world, the demon Lord Baruberi slept. And as he slept, though two of his great eyes were tightly closed and unseeing, his third eye was not. For the demon's third eye did not see the dark hall he had returned to since the gate had opened once more days ago, but instead saw that which was seen through the eyes of the destined child. Though Baruberi slept, still he watched Ryu Batison of the Dragon Kin, as God's time grew nearer and nearer. He watched, silent and sleeping and yet utterly fascinated, as the destined child and those who had chosen to follow him underwent Loden's trials. He watched as Ryu met with one of the only mortals Baruberi had ever considered a kindred spirit, though they had never once met. He watched as they accepted the ultimate power of Loden, Agni Anfani, into their hearts and minds and souls. And as he watched, his hideous, lipless maw contorted into a shape that could almost be said to resemble a smile. The rest of that day was short and uninteresting, and it passed all too quickly, especially for one who had lived as long as Baruberi. Eventually, Ryu Batison slept again, despite his own knowledge of the nightmares that awaited him. As the destined child's eyes closed, so did the third eye of the demon Lord Baruberi, as his other two eyes opened instead. Stretching his vast limbs with a great creaking of bones and cracking of chitin, he yawned once, and then he spoke, his terrible voice carrying through every inch of the hall of absolute darkness he waited in.
It is time,
he said to himself, voice filled with an inhuman joy beyond the comprehension of any other mortal save for himself.
He is coming.
Baruberi.
I hear and obey, oh my god,
Baruberi replied, instantly prostrating himself in the closest thing to a bow his warped frame was capable of.
How may I be of service?
For a long moment, and then another, there was no response. It is time, Baruberi. He is coming.
Yes, my god,
Baruberi said softly.
It is time, and he is coming. I implore you, my god, to allow me to fulfill my destiny, and confront him.
This pleases me, Baruberi. Your eagerness to serve has always pleased me. However, I heed no pleas, and respond to no entreatments. You are commanded to face the destined child, Baruberi, now that he has fulfilled his purpose and opened the gate for us. He and his are now the only thing that remains between me and the world above.
I shall, oh my god,
Baruberi whispered joyously.
For I am the mightiest of demons, and he will not pass through this hall while I still draw breath.
No. He will not. Know this, Baruberi. Should you fail me, your soul will not receive the same freedom from existence as those who please me. If you do not slay these ones, then I will have no choice but to do so personally, in order to prove my superiority over she who gave birth to me. I do not wish to do this, Baruberi. Do not make it necessary.
I will not, my god,
Baruberi assured him.
I know well that the son is not bound by the failures of the mother, any more than by her successes. Valerie may have defeated me, many years ago, but I have been laboring ever since to ensure that her spawn does not do the same. I am stronger now than I was then, and even then I was feared by her, and all of her kind who continue their defiance of us in this world.
That is why you are the greatest of my servants, Baruberi. Your strength, and the fear it inspires in others, are things which please me. Continue to please me, and you will have your reward. As you were first to live upon this world, so also will you be last to die, when you and I have scoured the planet clean of all other life.
I would claim to be unworthy, my god, but I would not lie to you, whether you knew or not,
Baruberi replied, smiling again.
For you and I both know that I am worthy, else you would not have given me this task.
Precisely. The child whose mind you have watched for these past 15 years has fulfilled his destiny, Baruberry. See that you follow him in this as well as everything else, and fulfill yours. I will not speak to you again until after you have done so, but I will be watching you, as you watch him. Do not disappoint me, Baruberry.
I hear and obey, oh my god,
Baruberry repeated, slowly raising himself back to his full height, capable of towering over not only mortals, but most of their buildings as well. The thought brought back his memories of the first Dragon War, in which he had served the goddess of lies, first as one of her instigators to trick mortals into warring upon each other for her amusement, and then later as her champion when said mortals had united against her and laid siege to her flying fortress. He had even fought the Ryu of that day and age, though their duel had been interrupted before its conclusion.
Ah, my goddess!
Baruberry whispered.
If you could see me now, what would you think?
It had always been a source of shame to Baruberry that he, first among demons, seemed to be the only one among his kind capable of affection for others, as incredibly rare as it was for him to do so. Miria had been one of the few who he had given it to, knowing all the while the contempt in which she held him in return, and refusing to care. Even now, a millennium after her death, the thought of her still caused his black heart to twitch hideously in his warped chest. Another had been an even more ludicrous choice than their shared mistress for 2 millennia, ever since she and he had accepted the man named Yuna into their service together, the second to pledge himself to her service. Baruberry had known then that the innocuous-looking mortal, with no fighting ability whatsoever, had and would cause more pain and suffering to the world than himself, the greatest and first of demons. And yet, he had still called Yuna alone his friend, once he had discarded his old name and taken up that which Miria gave him. The name of Habaruko. For 2 millennia, they had served the goddess of lies, as her right hand and her left. Baruberry, the king of the demons, second only to their goddess. The demon lord of death, her strongest warrior, and her personal champion should she ever require it. And Habaruko, her tactician, advisor and recruiter, a genius completely unrestrained by ethics or morals willing to commit any atrocity for her amusement, or his own. Baruberry had long ago grown bored with unnecessary pain and suffering, yet he still admired the artistry with which Habaruko had taken such things to new heights. In time, he grew to consider his fellow demon lord his oldest and greatest friend, despite knowing that Habaruka was incapable of truly returning the sentiment. The closest he could come was a scornful parody, and yet Baruberry had been grateful for that much, enough so that he had betrayed his god. He had not told Evans of Habaruko's plans to cheat destiny, and escape the death that Evans had planned for him at the hands of Ryu Batison and his friends. He had even experienced some slight regret when he had watched him die. But also, to his shame, relief as well.
Forgive me, Habaruko,
Baruberry murmured, speaking to the memory of his oldest and best friend, who had gone into the void beyond life.
But I am grateful to the destined child for causing your death. Grateful that I did not have to kill you myself.
Baruberry had raised Evans, teaching him the ways of power and of destruction, but he had never felt affection for the god he had worshipped ever since Miria had given him her infant son, commanding him to care for him should she be slain. Something in Evans' nature was abhorrent, even to him, whose affection had been spared towards 2 of the greatest abominations the world had known. And for one other, who was also dead now. With the 3 of them fallen, Baruberry had believed he would have nothing left in this world but its destruction to anticipate. And yet, his time with the destined child had left its mark on him, as much as it had on Ryu Batison. The mortal boy had been changed, irrevocably, by their shared contact through their sleeping minds as he grew into his destiny, but such things went both ways. Despite everything, despite his wish that Evans would fulfill should he succeed, Baruberry considered the chances of his victory to be precisely even. 50-50, as the mortals put it. And the prospect of that filled his empty heart with more anticipation than any reward ever could. He stretched his arms. He flexed his wings. And the demon lord Baruberry spoke, into the sleeping mind of Ryu Batison, the destined child.
Come.
Feelings from so long ago I don't remember.